Hey there everyone. So today I'll be replacing the inner and outer tie rod ends on my 2004 Chevy Colorado. The reason for doing this is the bellows boot between the steering rack and the inner tie rod end has broken and it's leaking power steering fluid everywhere. Additionally, when I take any sharp turns, I can feel some play in this inner tie rod end. So I'm going to go ahead and change both the inner and outer tie rod end out today. The tools I'll be using or needing is this inner tie rod tool, which I found at O'Reilly. I can rent it for 48 hours. And you definitely are going to need this to get that inner tie rod end out with these crow's foot attachments. Just to be safe, I also rented these outer tie rod end forks. I don't think I'll need it. I'll just hit the knuckle with a hammer and that should be good. The bellows boots have clamps on them that cannot be reused, so you're going to need to buy some hose clamps. From what I measured, I think 2 3/4 hose clamps should work. Maybe 3-inch would be better, but we'll check it out. And again, I'm checking out these instructions from 355 Nation. Again, it has the whole process in here on how to do it, and I highly recommend printing it out before you get started, just as a sanity check throughout the process. So without further ado, I'll start taking off that tie rod end and I'll get back to you. So the first thing we're going to do while taking off this tie rod is to loosen this nut here. I already did the other side, and what I can tell you is, first off, I would buy the wrench, the 22mm wrench to do it, just so you're not messing around with an adjustable wrench for this. If that's not an option, then I used an adjustable wrench here with a big pipe for some leverage, and it took a while, but I got it off. Some other people use a jack stand to jack up the wrench. Whatever works, but this is really damn tight, so best thing you can do is get the right tools for it. Once this nut is loose, we'll loosen up this one. This is a 21mm nut. Again, buy the right tools. I believe 13/16 might fit if you wedge it on there, but better safe than sorry. And with that, we can get the outer tie rod out, and I'll show you that once I get there. So real quick, I just wanted to show you this setup. Again, buy the right tools, but if you can't, an adjustable wrench and just pretty much a pipe to get the leverage to get that nut off. So once you loosen this nut, snug it back up so you can get an accurate number of rotations to help align it later on. So to get that tie rod out, just hit the knuckle with a hammer. If that doesn't work, you can lightly tap the top of the tie rod if that's an option. You just risk bending that, so if you're not going to reuse it anyway, that's fine. If you are planning on reusing it, be very careful not to bend that screw. So now that it's out, this is where you're going to want to count your rotations. So that's 1, 2, and so on. So now I'm going to be taking the bellows boot off in order to get the inner tie rod out. So there's just a simple clamp right here, which you can just take off. And there's a one-time clamp at the other end. You just need a flathead screwdriver to pop it off. So here's the inner tie rod without the boot. One thing to show you is this guy is extremely loose. Not much resistance there. So this guy was probably ready to go. If you check out your new ones, they do have some resistance, and that's what you want. So now I will use this inner tie rod tool over there, and it's pretty much a crow's foot around here. I'll let you guys know the measurement on that. I know a lot of those inner tie rod tools don't have the proper attachment, so bear with me here. So that measurement for that is around 39 millimeters, or around 1.5, 2 inches. So when you're looking for that tool, just make sure it has a crow's foot for that. So here's the inner tie rod tool. The crow's foot is on the inner side of that tie rod end. So I just have it propped up here to kind of give me a straight shot at it. And I'll be putting a breaker bar in here to pry it loose. So I just screwed the replacement inner tie rod back in by hand. So now I'm going to go ahead and torque this inner tie rod. Again, I'm going to prop it up like I had before, because you do not want to end up bending the shaft in the steering rack, so just be aware of that. And the torque value on that inner tie rod is 74 foot-pounds. So one other problem I had earlier with this tool, that's not the tool's fault, it's the inner tie rod manufacturers, the TRQ. The radius right here is wider than the actual spot for the crowfoot, so you can't slip the crowfoot over the inner tie rod. So you're gonna have to take the actual crowfoot out, put it behind the inner tie rod, slip the tool in, and then put it together that way. So again, that's not the tool's fault, that's TRQ's fault for some crappy machining there. So now that the tie rod is torqued, we're just going to end up greasing it. Don't be skimpy on the grease, it can only help. So just grease all around in that ball joint and wiggle it around, kind of work it in, and yep, that's about it. So now I'm going to put the bellows boot over the tie rod. So you just push it over shaft, and that 2 3/4 clamp fits perfectly, and eventually it'll get tightened around there. So the bellows boot is back on. The only thing left is the outer tie rod end. If you did not count your turns early on and you happen to not move the nut, which is possible because usually it rusts in place and can't move any further down, the thing you can do is measure the distance between the nut and the end of the bolt. So in my case, 30.5 millimeters, and then adjust this nut to that specified length. Again, you can only do this if these parts are exactly the same length from the middle of that to the end, which in my case they are. And this should end up being around the same number of turns that you counted earlier. So once you get it back to where it was earlier, or roughly, just snug up the bolt and then place this tie rod back in the knuckle. So now all that's left to do is torque this bolt. It's 34 foot-pounds. Put in the cotter pin if you have it on yours. And lastly, give this a nice tug and tighten it down. And other than that, should be good to go. Should be ready to take to alignment.